Welcome. We're already having a conversation. The only we're just going to make it a public conversation. I'm Anne Marie Slaughter, and welcome to Navigating Gender Dynamics in the Education Profession. I have to start with two reflections. One, so I'm a Princeton graduate, and Wendy Kopp is a Princeton graduate, and she's a later class than I am. We won't go into how much later. But the idea that this is the 25th anniversary of TFA is making me feel on the older side, I have to say, just having watched it grow and from her original thesis idea into the extraordinary institution it is today. And the second thing is, it's wonderful to moderate a panel prepared for a teacher's organization. This is a lesson plan, complete with the goals we are to achieve, the questions to ask to achieve them. I thought, this is a better lesson plan, given that I was a professor for many years, than I think I ever developed. But I have to compliment the organizers of the panel. So we're going to have what I hope is a very frank and lively conversation about obstacles to rising toward leadership positions in the education system. And this is a particular irony because teaching is often a women's profession, right? And you all know the history of how it became a women's profession. I always cite it as a caring profession, as a profession about investing in others. And indeed, 72% of K through 12 professionals are women, 72%, but fewer than 15% of superintendents are women. And that's actually the widest gap of any other field, right? So even in health, where you have 73% of professionals as women, you have 18% in leadership positions. So this is really something that just has to change. This is not a pool problem, right? This is not a question of we can't find qualified women. Women are the vast majority, and yet men are the vast majority of superintendents. So that's our charge, and of course we have 4 extremely accomplished women who have overcome those obstacles, and we're going to talk about what those are. But before we do, I want to frame this debate a little more. And I've got my notes on my phone, so. I think of obstacles in 3 broad categories. There's discrimination, and that used to be overt and conscious, and now increasingly is subconscious. That doesn't mean the overt stuff is all gone, it's not, but often now people are discriminating against women without realizing they are. It's subconscious bias. But that whole category of obstacles, legal obstacles, and bias on the part of people who promote you. That's one big category of obstacles. Second category I think of as confidence obstacles. And I think of confidence feminism. This is where we hold ourselves back. All the ways in which we have to learn often to behave more like men. I always say my husband listened to me at the first seminar we were both at together and said, why would anyone listen to you when you start out by telling people you're not an expert in this area? Because I did the classic female thing of, I'm not an expert here, but I think. And he was just like, well, then why would anybody want to listen to you? So those kinds of issues, and I'll say as a teacher to teachers on the confidence side, I was so terrified of public speaking. Let me say that again. I was so terrified of public speaking that I never did debate in high school. Even in law school, I did not sign up for litigation because I could not imagine arguing in court. I mean, the thought left me completely paralyzed. And as a professor, before I taught my first class, and some of you may know, can identify with this, University of Chicago Law School, I went to the classroom the night before and spent an hour talking to an empty classroom because I was terrified my voice would not come out the next day. So those are confidence issues. I've overcome my fear of public speaking, but only through lots of practice. So confidence issues, and those are important, and there's a whole industry on how we overcome them. And the third category are what I call care obstacles. And this is obviously what I wrote about in my Atlantic article, not so much about me, because I actually have had all the support you could possibly want. I just got a job that was ultimately inconsistent with caring for a teenager who was going off the rails. But for the vast majority of us, both our organizations, our workplaces are not designed to accommodate caregiving. And obviously, K through 12 teaching has traditionally been designed to do that, but longer and longer hours make that harder. And we all know you have summer vacation, as if you didn't have work to do in summer vacation. But even more important, how we plan a career, right? So the idea that maybe you could take some time and move laterally because you have kids and you want to be with those kids and yet still be on the leadership track is something that most people don't think about. We still tend to think up or out. So we're going to talk about that as well. So I think again, there are many obstacles, but I think of them in terms of discrimination, confidence, and then the whole battery of issues where work does not allow us to be very talented professionals, but also the caregivers we need to be. All right, so we're going to, with that sort of overall framing, let me introduce our wonderful panel. On my immediate left is Maria Joel Karstafen, who is the superintendent of the Atlanta Public Schools. New superintendent who clearly brought an Atlanta cheering section, so that's a great thing. And she has had a long and distinguished career as a leader in this field. Indeed, my roommate in Washington, who was in the education department, when I was reading down the names, said, "Oh my goodness," in terms of having Maria on the panel. And she came, beforehand, she was the superintendent of the Austin Independent School System. So on her left is Stacy Childress. Yes?
Come on, Atlanta!
So Stacy is the CEO at the New Schools Venture Fund, and before she's been there over a year, but before that she was she led the K through 12 Next Generation Learning team at the Gates Foundation. So we all know, and the organization I lead gets a lot of Gates funding. That push from Gates has been probably the single biggest force in philanthropy for the transformation of K through 12 education. And before going to Gates, she was a faculty member at the Harvard Business School, so has seen this from the teaching side herself as well. And on her left, I'm having to organize my, is Hansel Kang, who is from right here in DC. So she is the superintendent of DC's school, but since March 2015, so also new in that job. She came to her job from a long career in Tennessee, and again, as you all know, Tennessee has been a state that has made enormous changes, positive changes, in K through 12 education, and Hansel was a huge part of that. And finally, although not least, on the far left, I won't make any political judgments, is Elisa Villanueva Beard, who I think needs no introduction as the CEO of Teach for America. So we are thrilled to have her, and she has had a long career as a teacher and in administration. I just have to say, before we jump in, and you see on the slide, Paula Sneed, who is the chairperson and the CEO of Phelps Prescott Group, but also a national board member of TFA, is not on the panel. She was going to be the moderator, but she decided she wanted to be in the audience instead, but give her a round of applause. We're delighted to have her. So I'm going to sit down and run this as a conversation, and then after about 35 minutes, we're going to be taking questions from all of you. So let me start. I'll pose the first question from up here. Let me start with, tell us an aha moment when you realized that you were confronting sexism in some form, some obstacle that was related to your gender. Nobody has encountered anything like that.
I'm happy to go first. I grew up in Texas, in the Houston area, and spent the first decade of my career. My career is so long now because I'm so old. The first decade usually gets washed out on short form bios. The first decade I actually, after teaching for a year, was in the private sector and started out as a salesperson, very quickly became the sales manager of a 25-person sales team, and then ran our Houston office for the national company that I worked for. And I was and still am, super competitive. I like numbers, I like goals and trying to reach them. And so that really motivated me to try to have my team win a bunch of national competitions for our company. And we did. We were kind of beating teams in other cities that had much more mature sales forces, had been in the industry much longer, certainly than I had been and than others had been. I mean, I was still at this time in my late 20s. And so I felt like I was a real up-and-comer, and my results were better than almost everybody's in the company by the time this next thing happened. So this was long enough ago. This was in the very early 90s. How long has it been since any of you have actually gotten a physical paycheck? Some of you probably have never gotten a physical, because I can see you, and so it's probably true. I don't know what it means to get a paycheck.
You should start with, how many of you know what a check is?
A check, yeah. So there was this thing, you talk about rituals and routines and organizations. So there was this thing, which is payday, was one of the days everybody saw each other, because everybody came to get their check. Like, they came to the office around the same time, and you probably don't know what Airborne Express is, but now we have FedEx, but Airborne was one of the competitors back then, and our checks would come overnight mail, Airborne Express, by about 10 or 10:30 in the morning. Everybody would get together. Well, one day, unbeknownst to me, I was in Houston, we got the Dallas's office's pay packet, and Dallas got ours. My office manager didn't know it. She opens it up, and the payroll run is right on the top of the checks, just a clean sheet, and it's got everybody's salary. And she came quietly into my office and closed the door and said, "Stacy, I don't know how much you're making, but I know what Clyde's making in Dallas." I took it. He was making 30% more than me. And the thing that really shook me was that all of his people were making more than all of my people, because everybody was pegged against me. Right? So I was the general manager, and in every role, everybody was at the bottom of the band, no matter how long they'd been in the industry, in the organization, the company. They were making less than their peers just in our Dallas office, who, by the way, we were kicking their butts. Like, we were outperforming them dramatically, and had been for about 18 months. So the realization that there actually was a real thing that you could quantify that was different about men and women in our company, that not only affected me, but also affected every man that worked for me and every woman that worked for me. And I was just under 30, I was probably about 29, and I promise you, it's the first time in my entire life I ever thought it was a disadvantage to be a woman. Now, a lot of things happened from there that you might imagine that include changing my own pay, and therefore the pay of a lot of people.
Well, I do have to ask, what'd you do?
Well, I sometimes, we do that self-deprecating thing as women, and I realized I was about to say this. It's not actually true. I like to say, well, I'm not very good at relationships. That's silly. Of course I am. I'm pretty good at them. And so I don't know why I say that. I say that all the time. I'm actually not so bad at them, right? Maura, you're here. I'm okay, right? Yeah. And I had over the years, there is an advantage to being a woman in a male industry.
There is.
Doing well, right? Which is, people are kind of proud of you in this weird, maybe paternal way. But I had built really great relationships at our corporate office and in our HR department. So I had like 5 people I could pick up the phone confidentially and call about it, and I picked one of them and did. Now, it took months And I had all kinds of head wagging and, oh, no, just give us some time, and this is going to take a while. And I just kept saying, well, I don't understand why it would take any time at all.
Yeah, just give me a raise.
I don't know why would it take any time? You can do it tomorrow. And the pitch that actually ended up working, I'm not a crier, so I never cried, although there were moments I wanted to because I was so angry. I wanted to cry because I was mad. And the thing I was so worked up about is everybody had gotten screwed. Not just me as a woman leader. Everybody who worked for me was getting, really treated, very inequitably in the organization. And that was the thing that kept me going on it. If it had just been about me, I don't know that I would have persevered on it. I might have listened to, well, you're younger, and I was a lot younger. Who cares? So what? Like, we were killing it. But the fact that the injustice that I had, that my folks had been so, in my mind, mistreated relative to their peers just because I was a girl, like, that made absolutely no sense to me. And like I said, it took longer than it should have, but we did get it resolved. I'll stop there because that's the first time, and that was your question.
Yes.
It was overt. Like, that was a thing that was overt that I learned about accidentally. And what I've experienced is I've gotten further on in my career, and I don't know if it's both social change and then, just changes I've made in where I work in my environment. It's much more implicit now. Like, that was a clear thing. What? They're all making more than me? And he was the guy that said he wished he had on a skirt when he negotiated his sales goals because he thought they were not as fair as mine. Like, that guy's making more than me? Like, that was like overt, right? But this, the move that we're in now, like, where it feels more implicit and kind of tougher to sort out, I think is a good thing to talk about too.
So I'm going to ask the next person. Hansel wants to go, but before you do, so two things. One, Lily Ledbetter found out that way too, right? That's what started her, is somebody slipped her a card that just had the 4 salaries, and she realized after all this time, something about seeing it in black and white. But the other thing, and I found this very helpful, is you weren't just negotiating for yourself. You were negotiating for others. And this is one of since women are still socialized to be selfless, when you think that you're negotiating for others, it's much easier. So I in my career, did a lot of hard negotiating with law school deans to get my salary up. And for me, it was, I'm my family's primary breadwinner. This is not about me. This is about my children. This is about, what we're going to be able to do for them. So yes, Hansel.
So I'll share an example that is a little more nuanced, and I think actually blends sort of the first 2 kinds of obstacles that you talked about. And it's funny you mentioned law school, because that's where my example takes place. So I went to Harvard Law School, and in my first year of law school, there was this interesting phenomenon where you would sit in these classes. So in your first year, you're taking all the same classes as other people in your section. So you're with these 90 people all day, every day. And when in those classes, I had always been the kind of student who raised my hand, probably more than my elementary school teachers wanted me to, and had never shied away from anything, worked really hard, got great grades, took the hardest math and science classes all through high school, went toe-to-toe in college with guys who thought they were going to run the CIA and be president one day, and was fine going toe-to-toe with them. And then suddenly I got to my first year of law school, and I found myself just not able to speak up in class. I'd read all the cases, but I just felt like I didn't understand what was going on, and I didn't feel confident speaking up. And in the few classes where the professor would cold call, I was terrified. I'd shake about getting called on, which is it had never happened to me. And the craziest thing was, it wasn't just me. When I looked around the room, it was like that for all of my female classmates as well, and the men did not have that issue. My male classmates were fine speaking up. And this is at a moment in time when Harvard Law School was about 60% women and 40% men, and yet when you looked at the participation rates, it was far skewed towards men participating. And the Yale Law Journal had done research on this. They counted how many times people participated, and they saw this as a trend that played out. And then that continues on to then when you look at, even though again, at top law schools, it tends to be more than half women overall in the student body, the leadership roles, the most competitive clerkships, the most competitive research assistantships still tend to be skewed towards men. And so it was this combination of, I don't know what about that environment shook me for the first time in my life, but it did, and I saw that play out. And I also know that I think when they interviewed some of the professors through the Yale study, they were like, well, when I call on the women, they get this look on their face like they're terrified and they want to die. So of course I don't want to call on them. That feels uncomfortable for everybody, right? And And so trying to find those ways to push past that, I think, is really tricky. But those societal factors of this like subtle discrimination, it can also play on your own confidence.
That's a great point. Elisa.
I've got one. So I've been in this role, for those of you that don't know, I was our chief operating officer for 8 years, then I became our co-CEO, and then I've been in the CEO role for, 5 months, 4 months, something like that. And I would say that my aha moment probably came 2 years ago maybe. I was having a very bad week, maybe month, I don't know. And I was in a role, I was learning a lot. There's a lot going on at Teach for America. And I remember I had all these meetings lined up, and I go into this one meeting, and I had started to build a really good rapport with this funder, who's like a really important person to the community everywhere. And I was exhausted. I don't think I had slept in 2 days. My kid was sick. I have 4 boys. And I had left a sick kid, and there's a lot going on. I was just super stressed on overdrive. And I'm a passionate person. I connect with people, and I'm passionate, but I'm very competitive, and I don't get emotional at work. I'm always, I feel like I've trained myself, you don't do that unless you're with a really good friend. But for some reason, I was having this awful day, and the person I was meeting with is this older man, and sort of I felt a connection like a dad. We had been building a rapport where I sort of was having a moment, and I was, we were expressing something, and I started to cry, and I was like, oh my God, I'm crying. Don't cry. Elisa, do not cry. But I worked through it, but I did cry, and I was clearly, but I had complete self-control. I did not lose at all my anything. But I was describing an intense situation to him, and we were talking, and that happened, and I left, and it was I should not have cried. That was not good. But it's okay. We have a good rapport. It's fine. Well, I come to learn, I don't know, a little bit a year and a half later when we're making this transition from co-CEO to CEO, I hear, because I hear lots of things, that this person has called me emotionally unstable and is fearful that perhaps I cannot handle this. I'm young, I'm, whatever. I have 4 kids, can I do this with 4 children? And that was devastating. Because what it does is it just puts so much pressure on you, right? Because I have to pump myself up before meetings when I'm exhausted, and I'm know that I'm just so worked up because I'm under any circumstance will I not cry, because you can't. My lesson: you can't trust anyone. You just know, no, you really just can't, because you don't know, and you start to wonder, if he felt if he would have seen his daughter, if I looked like his daughter, would he have? I don't know, would he have just experienced that differently? But I don't look like his daughter. I look like most people's I'm not anyone's daughter that I meet with a lot during the day. And so you gotta be in a different mode. And it's a lot to carry, but it's just what the lesson I'm in right now in my own trajectory of being in roles like this, and perhaps I can learn from other ladies who have been around for a little bit longer. But yeah, that was an aha moment for me in my leadership journey.
That's a good one. I've had a similar moment, but actually the guy took it okay. But it creeps up on you, right? You're fine.
Out of nowhere.
And suddenly
you're oh my God.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
So, Maria.
So my aha moment was absolutely blatant discrimination, and it was around job attainment and breaking into the superintendency. So I worked very hard like everyone else. I was a good student. I take my job very seriously, and I knew at the time exactly what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. And so the opportunity presented itself. I was recruited to apply for the superintendency, and I was one of the finalists. And I'm sitting there with the mayor, the head of the board, people who are on the interview committee, and I never forget, the mayor turns and says, "You're absolutely the right person for this job. We have no doubt you will get the job done. You have the best ideas, you clearly are going to work really hard, but there is no way I am presenting a young woman I mean, this is like in front of everyone. I was like, hey, dude, that's like discrimination. And, you know, and everyone in that room, including the female chair of the board, didn't say anything.
Wow.
And I'm one of those people that cannot, I'm from Selma, Alabama, so I'm down with civil rights talk and voting rights talk. So it's the silence of the people who are supposed to be with you that just kills me. And I looked at every woman in that room and could not believe not a single one of them, mothers of children in the system that was jacked up, weren't going to say, you know, that just isn't right, and we need to hire the person who can get the job done for the right reasons, and it is what it is, we're going to present it to the public. So I felt like mine, you know, and I'm not talking very long ago, so this is like real-time America, you know, capital cities, you know, legitimate, well-known mayors and leaders, and they just said it in the interview process. And so, you know, for me, it was so disappointing because I just couldn't understand why none of the women in that interview committee challenged him. Now, make no mistake, that thing about confidence, I don't have that problem. So I totally jacked him up in that interview and said, that's discrimination, and that's fine. You don't think I'm right for the job for that reason? That's ridiculous, and your stuff isn't going to turn around. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, they're still struggling because they didn't hire me in the first place. But I'm just saying, like, that one was just straight in your face.
Absolutely. So we're going to turn to a slightly more uplifting question. You're getting told don't trust anyone. Fellow women won't stand up for you. No women will talk. I mean, but you know, one thing that you bring out which is really important, is how ingrained ideas of what authority looks like are. So when I was dean of the Woodrow Wilson School at 42, I would routinely be on a plane and someone would say, what do you do? A man, or sometimes a woman, and I'd say, I'm the dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, and they would say, oh, you're so young. Well, you know, I look like a 42-year-old woman. There are plenty of 42-year-old men out there, I mean, who President of the United States at that age, right? But what they were really saying is, deans don't look like you. Deans are male. And they have at least a little gray hair. So this sort of idea of this is what the role looks like and you don't look like it is very powerful. And yeah, I think you do often have to just take it on very directly. Okay, so I want to move us. So this was the question about, all right, the moments when you really realize, whoa, whatever you may want to think, we're in 2015 or we were in 2005 or 1995, sexism is still alive and well. Now I want to fast forward you to, you are a very successful woman. You are a woman leader, but as we said, you are one of the 15%. There are not many women leaders around you. So now how do you cope with the fact that you are the symbol, the role model, the universal mentor and advisor, the person who has to be on every committee? I served on every single hiring committee from the moment I got into law teaching, because you had to have a woman on the committee, and there were only 3 women in the law school, right? So how do you cope with the kind of too much, precisely because you are a senior woman? And this is important in terms of continuing to rise, because if you do all that committee work, right, the guys you're competing with, that's the housework often. The guys you're competing with are often not doing that. They're focusing on their teaching or their administration. So how do you handle that?
So I can take a stab. I think just one thing is I feel really blessed to have had a lot of women leaders that I've been able to look up to. So I started out as a Teach for America Corps member and then worked on staff at TFA, and I got to see really fantastic women leaders within the organization, which was really powerful. And in my current role in DC as the state superintendent of education, I'm one of a number of education leaders in the city, and we have a female mayor, we have a female deputy mayor for education, Kaya Henderson is the chancellor of DC Public Schools, we have great charter leaders who are female. So it's really exciting, and I actually don't feel that aloneness. And what's interesting is, and this goes, I think, a little bit to sort of what you were talking about in boards' roles and selections of superintendents, which is where I think the statistic that we start out with came from. I do think that depending on the selection path for roles, things can look a little bit different in terms of gender balance. So I was looking at the last conference I went to with all the state leaders, so not the urban local superintendents, but the state leaders. And in the conference book, they print every time all of the chiefs in every state and how long they've been there and who they are. And I noticed that, so there's been a ton of turnover in those ranks, and having been in my role for 10 months, I'm now like the 20th most senior person or something, which is terrifying. But then I did notice also that the gender balance, because I'd just been invited to this panel, it's about 50-50 among state leaders, which is just interesting. And state leaders are appointed differently than local leaders are. Local superintendents are almost always hired by an elected board, where, and in Tennessee, I certainly saw this, that often the assistant superintendent ranks, we call them supervisors in Tennessee, there were a lot of women in those roles, and often younger women, and yet when you got to the superintendent levels, very, very few of those women were showing up. In the state superintendent levels, there are some that
Very
are
few of those women were, I just didn't hear what you
getting
said.
to the superintendent level. So many at the very next layer down, but not being chosen by elected school boards, not being put up for that head role. In the state superintendent ranks or commissioner of education ranks, you can be appointed by a governor or a mayor in the case of DC. You can be appointed by a state board of education, or sometimes you're elected. And I've noticed that, I think, again, sometimes this notion of like statewide elected office, I think sometimes the state superintendent role is one that women feel more comfortable running for at times. These are just, I don't know, my hypotheses, but it's just been interesting to see different dynamics. But in terms of the base question around just how do you cope with the leadership that comes with it, I think so much of it is looking to sort of supports and the people who give you the confidence in your role. And I think that can be looking at amazing women leaders around you. I think it can also be men. So my most recent former role before this was I was chief of staff to Kevin Huffman, who is the commissioner of education in Tennessee. And first of all, Kevin hired me to be his chief of staff when I had no idea what a state education agency did, no idea what a chief of staff did. And when we'd worked together on some projects when I was 24 years old working for TFA, like in a much earlier role. And so I thought he was crazy, but it was great. He and I both talked about the leap of faith that it was for both of us, that he was hiring me and trusting me to do this work, and that I picked up and moved to Nashville where I didn't know anyone and didn't know what I was doing. But I had a great time and learned a lot from him. And he's someone who I saw he was someone who I think was very intentional about not keeping that traditional model of leadership. He looked for leadership in whatever form and whatever form it would take, and really gave people a chance to step up into those roles, gave me a chance, and I grew so much working for him. And I wouldn't be in this chair without him as state superintendent. I loved being a chief of staff. I loved working behind the scenes. I was also terrified of public speaking, never saw myself as that out front leader. In fact, told friends consistently, like, I love being a number two. I'm never going to be the number one in an organization. But Kevin put me up for this job, and he thought I should do it. And that belief made all the difference, because I didn't think I would have been able to do this job, and it's because of him that I'm here.
So something you said I want to pull out, this love being the number two, but never imagine myself being the number one, because I hear that a lot, and often the chief of staff is somebody who's great at organization, great at administration, makes things run and so the leader can be the public face and the big thinker and all of that. And it is very important to get from that role, which many of us are very confident we can do, to no, I can run the office, but I can also be the leader. And often, it's fabulous that he saw you in that role, but that you also were willing to take that leap, because of course it's scary. Right? I mean, it's terrifying, right? The first day that I was the director of policy planning, my stomach hurt as much as the first day of camp, right? I mean, it was like, oh my God. But that's true for men too, right? That's just doing something new. So other people on this, the issue about because you are one woman, one of the few women in a world where now it's expected that there's at least one woman, on a panel, on a committee, whatever. How do you navigate that? No one else has had that problem.
It's interesting, Emery. So I'm thinking about this. It is interesting, and Hansel points this out in the state chief role, that it's become much more gender balanced over time. Be interesting to think through the reasons that might be. In the roles that Elisa and I are in, there are more women CEOs of education nonprofits now, and lots of women founders. I mean, Wendy being the first among us that many came after. I don't know what the exact balance is, but certainly many more women in those leadership roles, unlike Maria's world,
Exactly.
where there is still this just dramatic imbalance, the 15% women in a female-dominated industry. And I think that's an interesting thing. I find being this is the first time I've been a CEO. Been at New Schools about a year and a half. I've had lots of leadership roles before that. My role as a faculty member is very much kind of like the CEO of your own work. You don't really report to somebody as a faculty member. And I never thought I should be the number two. I thought I should be the number one since the day I was born as number one, and then there ended up being three little sisters. When it was like, of course I'm number one, so let's go. So I'm a terrible number 2, 3, 4, 5. That's where I'm a real problem in organizations, as I've learned over the years. And so, but what I do struggle with, now finally being a CEO, it is isolating.
It is.
It's isolating to be the leader of an organization. I assume that's also true for men. There's some literature on it. I do think there's some gender differences in how we deal with the isolation of leadership that come from, just the way women and men, build relationships differently and share their troubles differently in different contexts. The worry that on a tough day, I really might cry, so I don't want to talk to anyone, because I actually don't want to talk to someone who is nice to me and then makes me cry while I'm having a tough day, because if you're nice to me, I might cry. So I do think that just that leading on its own, I'd love to. So there are some men in the audience. If you're a male leader in the audience, do you ever feel kind of isolated as a leader with the challenges you're struggling with, that you actually have to think about whether or not to share that burden of leadership, or is that just a lady thing? Are the men? Yeah, I think that's a leader thing. Yeah. And then I think we have this extra challenge of figuring out as women, how do we get the support we need, which is part of what you're talking about. How do we play the role we're supposed to play as a female leader who is supporting women who are coming along next, while also kind of bearing the responsibilities of leadership in a way that, because of how we're wired up, can make us seem weak or needy as we try to cope with that isolation.
I think my challenge, we have
This is
lots.
great. I'm just going to let them talk.
We have lots of women at Teach for America, and I think what I actually worry most about and am more conscious of is being a mother and an executive. We have lots of new moms in my organization and amongst our core member and alumni community, so I'm constantly just trying to figure out how to be a good how to balance all of that, and how to ensure that it's empowering for women to work in our organization, where we are being accommodating to new mothers and have policies and systems that make it easy for them to be working moms. So we know it's like the hardest thing in the world, and how to be a model of someone who can make this something that people want to choose to do, which is just really hard. So that part of the conversation, I think, is very real. And the other is, I think there's the dimension of like race and ethnicity. So it's a woman, and then to be a person of color amongst that, which are just, there are few women, and there are much fewer women of color in CEO roles, certainly in Latinas, but also African Americans in our space. And so I think that creates just another real dimension that is really important for us to talk about as well.
All right, so you just raised 3 more questions.
I know.
And I was going to ask, I'm going to ask them, but I'm going to put a little structure here. And so we've got 3 topics on the table. One is, how does being a leader change your behavior? And I will just say, I think for everyone, it's lonely at the top. But I think if you are a woman who's gotten along by forging relationships, because that is often how we do it, and that's a gender essentialist statement, I understand that, but still, then suddenly you can't be friends with your employees in the same way. So that's one set of issues, and I'd love to hear first more comment on that. Then this question of which we were certainly going to get to, the family question, and how you do it with family. And then third, very much, I was going to pose it: is it different? How is it different for a woman of color? But let's stay on this leadership point for a minute, because I certainly have. I don't like being distant from people, and yet I have found you can't confide in people as a leader. You get into trouble, and you can't be too friendly. But so I'd like to hear anybody else on that topic before we move on. Maria.
Well, I mean, I have to answer the last question, because I do think I have a different perspective on this, the too much piece, because on top of the fact that, I'm a woman, I'm Black, and I also have always been the youngest person in the room in these kind of critical situations. And I say this because I didn't realize how intense it could be until I came back to the South. So I went from Northeast to Midwest. I was in Ohio and Minnesota, and Texas and Georgia are my first 2 places I've been that remind me of Alabama, right? So I'm going to say this. I recommend, so when I'm the only woman in the room, and in Texas, I was the only Black and the only woman in the room all the time. Use it, the way I manage it is, if I have to serve on this, you're gonna make me chair. Build your resume. Get your career, I'm serious. Make them pay you. Make them put you as chair. Don't sit on a committee. Say, I don't have time to be on the subcommittee. I'm gonna be on the executive committee. Get assigned to the finance or the accounting. I mean, make it work for you. So if you're the only one and they need you, you make sure they earn it, so you get what you need out of it. So I want to be sure I said that.
I have to say, I wish I'd heard that piece of advice.
Don't play either. You need to tell them, I'm really busy, for this very reason. I know y'all are looking for someone, but don't just accept anything either.
Yeah,
right. That's the other thing. Discriminate against them, and pick the stuff that really works for you. And I will tell you, I'm a superintendent, but I don't go to all those conferences and things, right? Unless I'm actually on the board of something. You don't have the time, and it's not gonna. The way you're gonna help yourself if you're a woman in this career, and hopefully we'll get to this. But if you've got to actually make a plan. You have to make a plan and work the plan. But don't let them use you. Get something out of it that makes your career stronger and your resume look better. Okay, then I'll move to the question that you asked. What was it about leadership? Because I was so wanting to.
So there are 3 on the table, and I've given up any
the leader.
So I'm not running my class according to the lesson plan. I'll just tell you right now. This class, but 3 questions, and you don't have to answer all of them. But one was, being at the top and how it changes your behavior, particularly with those below you. The family question, which I'm going to come back to, I'm going to make sure we talk about it, but also speaking to what it is to be a woman of color. And you're right, if you are a woman of color, they need you doubly, right, on those committees in the sense of wanting diverse representation. But that's not the only difference. So.
Go ahead.
So I'll tackle a couple of them. I think So I think in terms of being a leader, part of it was having to let go of, having to just be okay with not fitting the traditional views of leadership, I think both others and even my own, and just accept that I wasn't going to, although I learned so much from working for Kevin, I wasn't going to lead in the same way that he did or in the same way that Kaya does, even as, you know, a great female leader in education in the city, that my leadership was going to look different because I'm different, and just being okay with that and accepting it, and then trying to figure out, like, what does this mean? So sometimes I'd ask myself, I'd hear myself in my head being like, would Kevin do this, or would this other person do this? And I just had to stop asking that and just figure out, what am I going to do that feels right to me in this situation, and just be okay with that. And then I think in terms of this, how being a leader does change your behavior, I agree that it can feel incredibly lonely at the top, and I think it just has meant, actually, it has meant, I think, building relationships and extending trust with my team, and feeling like even though they report to me, I need a team around me. Like, I know that's how I need to operate, and that's had to meant like pushing my own boundaries with what I've been comfortable with. I think I'm someone who's tried to separate personal and professional a lot of my life, but having to like extend some of those boundaries and extend some trust and find the lines, you know, but still have some comfort being more personal, more informal with some of the folks who work for me than I normally would have been, because that's my team, and I can't have it any other way. And then in terms of how it's different for being a woman of color, I think just even if it's not like being formally pegged to represent in the sense of like representing on a committee or something, I think that you are tagged as like a representative for groups in a way that feels uncomfortable. So I remember when I first got named to this role, I had multiple people come up to me and say, you know, I'm not thinking this, but I hear people out there in the community are thinking, like, they look at you and they are wondering if you're going to be the next Michelle Rhee. And I see more laughing because, like, people kept talking about this. They were like, you're an Asian woman, and so obviously you're going to be like Michelle Rhee. And I was like, we don't actually have like anything else in common. I don't know. I mean, no disrespect to her, but we're really different people. So, and I don't know what to do with that information. Also, like, what am I going to do with that? So I'm just going to like put it aside, because there's nothing I can do about that, and be who I am. And hopefully people will take me on my own terms and figure that out. But that was not the most fun sort of congratulations comment here. So.
I think that it changes your behavior. I mean, it's incredibly, unless you've done a superintendency, I'm serious, you can't imagine what a lonely, tough job it is. And people can't even understand the depth of support you need. And I think that's for men and women in this job. It does not, the pain of turning around urban ed does not discriminate based on gender. So I think it's hard for, if you're really doing the work, I have an African American male chair of the board who is, you know, also younger, and I can see how it wears on him too. It's just really tough and incredibly lonely. But I think the gender thing that, and I see it more in Atlanta, because Atlanta's a black city. There's a style of the African American male leadership that is, I mean, you can feel it in the city. And so there's a female version of that I am trying to understand, and I'm trying to get how it works there. But I will say this, I think regardless of race, if you're a woman in the top role as the executive, as soon as you get in, people start testing you. And I think that's the thing, like, I never think I get to behave like me, like just be me. You try to, but people kind of jam you in the wall on it. And so I feel like sometimes my behavior is tougher than it needs to be, because they almost expect you, or trying to get you to be more like what it is they need from a leader to make whatever happen. And it is such a psychosocial dynamic, and I wish I had studied more in college on things like this, because the truth is, you're working with people and the human side of transformational change in the work that I do. And so, and I think there are things like, I find that I trust very few people. It is, my circle is so tiny. I feel like you're exposed and vulnerable a lot, so you have to know the people around you are never going to hurt you. It's the craziest thing, but I think for women in particular, you have to be unbelievably careful. And I think that it makes you, if you go too far, and I watch this is part of the reason why the cheating scandal happened in Atlanta. I think like, if you don't keep it in check, it makes you paranoid. You think people are out to get you. And you've got to really manage that, because the research is clear about how hardcore people are on women in leadership, especially, Black women. I've studied that stuff the most. We're the fastest group they'll call the B word. We're the fastest group they'll call the N word. We're the fastest group that they will attack your children. You're going to get to family, but I've even heard, I've been advised by, when I was kind of coming up in the ranks, women saying to me, don't go into the superintendency so early. Do other stuff, but don't do it now. Wait until you have kids and a family and they're out of school, because people will actually threaten and terrorize your children, and you just emotionally, it is just too much. Just about every superintendent I know who had school-age children in a district moved their children in these big urban districts out of their district to go somewhere else, because of that kind of stuff. Try closing a school and see what people do. So I think it changes your behavior. It is just, but I don't think you mean to. I think other people are putting the pressure on you, and you're reacting sometimes. And I don't think that shows our true selves, but there's something about it that I think, you don't have as many friendships at work. I find myself saying all the time, God, I don't have a single, friend that I can call and just totally trust I can be open and me. That level of vulnerability will get you killed. It'll get you fired, it'll get you in trouble, and it is if that comes apart. And so I worry about us. And you still haven't answered my question about why those women didn't help me in that interview, because they don't help me. Also in this role, I don't find that we support each other. So so I think that your behavior does change, and you really have to know who you are, and you just are so dependent on your own self-confidence, but it is unbelievably wearing.
Can I say one thing, Anne Marie, that's a little bit different than that? I think I'm in a very different privileged position than you are. Behavior changes. I used to not wear makeup, and I have to wear makeup now. You have to play the part. I always wear a suit, but never makeup. Now I wear makeup. No. But in the role that I am in, I think that I actually have the opportunity to be me. And I remember in the last 6 months just saying I am who I am, and I have been chosen to do this job, and I am just going to do it the way I do it. And so we do start conversations with how are you. I don't really care what's on your agenda for the first 2 minutes. How are you? Because that matters, and we should know how we are, and we should support each other, and we should care about that. And where I work, that's what we're going to do, because I get to be in charge, and we have values, and we're going to treat each other in a certain way. And so I just think I personally feel like I do have the privilege to just be who I am and get to create a culture that is inclusive of many different people, and I cross very many lines. I'm a woman of faith. I am a Mexican-American woman. I am a woman who cares about people. I am competitive, and I want to get stuff done, and all of that is going to come alive. And that I also feel like when we also decide, we are in charge. We get to decide what systems are in place, and we get to decide how the train runs, and we got to own that. And I think that's also a responsibility that is empowering. And I felt a shift in me when I just said, I am who I get. This is like a really important moment of empowerment for the entire organization. That's mostly women, and I do feel blessed because I do have great friends who I've just gotten to know over time in the organization. I'm looking at Michelle Culver here, who has been with me for, I don't know, almost a decade. And I do, in my hardest moments when I'm just like, I need just someone who is not going to judge me and can just listen and deeply knows me, and I know her and trust. Michelle Culver, I call her. And I'm surrounded by like 4 women just like her that I lean on, and I think it's really important for us to find who those people are, and it's women personally that I turn to in those hardest moments.
All right, so I'm going to give, we've got like 4 minutes to answer the question I'm about to ask him, and then questions are coming from all of you. So get your cards ready and write out a question, and we will start screening them. So I think, now I'm going to ask the family question. So Maria, you said, not Maria, I'm sorry, Elisa, you said you have 4 children, which is amazing. I think it is perfectly possible to be the female head of a nonprofit organization and have children. In fact, there are plenty of examples. And I will note on this panel, we have 2 heads of nonprofit organizations, and we have 2 people who are in an extremely public leadership position, right? And the biggest leadership positions are the public ones. And I'm not saying that being the head of TFA is not public. It is, but the nonprofit sector, there are lots of women in it. And there are more women as heads of nonprofit organizations. Obviously, schools are nonprofit too, but they're different. They're public. So I want to ask the question, and it's a hard one. You know, Maria, given the way you just described being superintendent, and I think most men would say the same thing. I mean, it's lonely at the top. That's a man saying that. That didn't come from a woman leader. That comes from leadership as a whole. And as you said, you know, the sort of, you know, needing loyalty, well, that's the watchword in this town, right? Because loyalty is valued more than competence precisely because you have to have a few people you can absolutely trust. So it's a big job, and it's a scary, you know, it's a very public job. I'm going to ask, can you do that kind of job and have a family at the same time?
Really? We're going to talk about this while
We
he's
are.
filming? God, that's incredibly personal.
Well,
Okay, I'm working on it. I'm trying here. Clearly, you can. My mentor, you know, had, but I mean, I don't know of a successful superintendent. I mean, if the ones that are like, I feel like they did things like they adopted kids later, or they had their kids were off in college. It never seems like anyone in this job is like, I'm going to start my family and have my kids while I'm in the superintendency. And I'm sure there are smaller superintendencies where people do that, but in the big urbans and in the grind, you know, I don't know. I really don't, but I'm sure there are people who have. They just, I mean, I don't see them. I don't know them. They don't come to conferences. They don't follow me on Twitter.
I'm sure they don't.
They're not on your committees.
So, I mean, and I know that there are like some, like, you know, like some I've heard of, but I think it was still very hard to do the job. And I know more details about those people's personal lives that I won't share on how they kind of managed it, but I don't think it's the norm. And the public piece is just like, you're not an elected official, right? So it's sort of like you're like, I didn't really bargain for all that. I'm just trying to teach kids to read, you know? I'm not out here asking for your vote. I'm trying to manage, you know, talent in my district. And so I just think that it is, I try to imagine like a night, like I think of the week I just had and how if my family, and he can never show this to my dad, but if my family knew like the details of what went down this week, there's no doubt they would all be like, you have to quit. And if I had kids, I mean, like I watch my board member who has a young baby, and he's like schlepping that kid to every meeting, and I don't know what he does to have him sleep the whole time. But I try to imagine, I'm just like, I'm trying to be realistic, like, but he doesn't have to breastfeed. He doesn't have to, I'm just trying to think of like all the healthy things that moms do. And how do you do that in this kind of crazy, I try to imagine how you could possibly manage sometimes something that starts and it goes for 9 hours straight. It can start at 6 o'clock in the afternoon and it's 2 in the morning and I'm still working an issue. And then it goes for 3 days and you do not sleep. So, I take any woman who's figured that out and is able to do this kind of job with that kind of demand, especially with infants and small children. Somebody does need to write a book and document it to help other people who want to get into that and still have a young family. But I just think it is, I look back at it often and I'm like, God, why wasn't I listening to my mentors who were saying, like, maybe in this job, not every, but urban, public, large city superintendencies, you might need to think about that a little differently. And I just think it's really hard.
And we never we don't ask men to do that, right? There's no man in that role who is expected to be the primary caregiver at the same point. You can do it, but you need a primary caregiver partner at home. Right? That's how the men do it, right? Somebody else is worrying about the play dates and all of that so that you can do the kind of job that just doesn't stop.
And I think and what I've watched a little bit, but I would say like, I feel like, I would just say this, you got to figure out, at least the ones I saw that had older kids, like they went into superintendency later and like their kids are typically like in high school and stuff. The one thing that I did see them do is delegate. They delegated at work and they did not go home and do the dishes. They had support, whether it was, a housekeeper that came every single day. They would just tell me like, you just can't go home and think you can do all of that and try to manage the other stuff. So I do think like the concept of delegation at work and home, you have to be masterful at it. But, I don't...
Which applies to all women.
So I think like that was something, if I have some little nugget to give you, think about that. Not that I figured it out and I don't have a housekeeper every day, but I do want like a 1950s wife, like, like with the apron and the, honey, you're home, let me bring you a drink. I'll take that any day,
Don't we all? I used to, I would come home from business trips and my husband, and I would be thinking, I want a drink and a bath and bed. And of course, my husband, who'd had the kids the whole weekend, I'd be met at the door with, here. Right? Because he's like, added to here. Other reflections, we've got enough questions to have a 9-hour meeting, but I think I can ask 2. But I do want other reflections on this question of, there are big jobs. That's what I had at the State Department that don't stop. And again, we don't ask men to do those jobs because men who have families who do those jobs have a lead caregiver. She may be working, or he, regardless, but other reflections on whether that's possible, how you do it, when you do it.
Well, I'll share since my boys are 7, 5, 3, and 1, and I don't have the job where, I'm being scrutinized in different ways on social media every day, and being attacked in different ways, and it's public, and I'm the spokesperson for Teach for America, and the world we're in is the world we're in. But I'm on the road 3 days a week. And I travel for my job because we have 52 communities where we do the work, and the work is in our local communities. And so when we have lots of women in lots of executive roles, and we talk a lot about this in our organization because women have to make hard decisions. When you're an executive, you usually have to travel a lot. You have to make various choices. I mean, I also, work a long time. I'm a tired person, and I feel like I've just chosen that life. I have to get up super, super early when I'm home because I have to get like 3 to 4 hours of work done before my children get up. Because when they get up, I'm with my kids, and I get them ready for school, and I feed them breakfast, and then I take them to school, and I work, and then I pick them up, and then sometimes I have to do work on the back end once they go to sleep. But the most important thing for me is I am so happy, personally, I really am. I am like completely full and energized because I love my job. I am impact driven, and I know that it matters what I do every day. I love my children, and over time, I have just found peace with the choices that I make. My most important thing is my faith, and then it's my family and my friends, and then probably work comes after that. But I really organize myself in that way. And when I'm starting to feel off kilter, like it doesn't work for me to be gone for my family 4 or 5 nights a week. And I've had to do that sometimes, and I have to do that sometimes. But that cannot be the norm because I'm off. I can't do that. We've handled and figured out, and I have an incredible husband, and that really matters, is that you have a very supportive person who just doesn't have any resentment for you, that, does the hard stuff when you're gone, and then you really feel like you're co-parenting. No one does the dishes, we both do the dishes. We just really share the responsibility of raising our kids. And I think we need and so I encourage women. I personally have just come to peace with what are the things that matter to me, and if I feel full and balanced, then that's what matters. And I think we all need to figure what that is for everyone. And it's different things for different people, and I do believe there are different seasons in our lives, and we might have to make different choices at different points. But I think the support that we need to have of one another is really important, because it's just not helpful when when people are like, oh my gosh, so who's raising your children? I'm like, I am raising my children. Yes. My kids know who their mom is, and they are, like, we talk about values. We have dinner together every 4 days a week, 4 nights a week. We have dinner. We talk about our days. We talk about being kind. We talk about what we've learned, and that really matters. And so yes, and there are some days where I miss the play because I have to be in New York on that Thursday night, and that sucks. But I try to make those minimal. I prioritize the things that really, really matter. I remember I missed Langston, which is my oldest kid, his first birthday, and I was okay with that. I was sort of like, he's 1. We celebrated on the weekend. We had like a big party. I'm like, so he doesn't know if I'm not there on Wednesday. We're gonna celebrate it on Saturday. And it's okay. And I literally did not think of it. It was just like completely fine. But once he hit 3, I was like, there's no way I'm going to miss my kid's birthday. And so now, like, I won't miss any of my kids' birthday. I will not travel on that day. I'm supposed to be in D.C. next week on this day, and they're like, Lisa, you have to have this interview on this day, and it's Marshall's birthday that day. I'm like, I can't go. I'm not doing the interview, because
you shape the job to yourself.
Yeah, you have
which
to.
is hugely important, and you're easy on yourself.
Yeah.
So I want to ask Stacy and Hansel if they want to jump in on this question, and then the final question, and I'll give you a chance to think about it, is what piece of advice would you give to young female teachers? I'm looking out at quite a number of young female teachers who hope to one day be in similar leadership positions like you. What's the one piece of advice you would give them? We've heard one, which is extremely helpful, which is if they want you on a committee, insist on being the chair, and then delegate the work to the other members of the committee. So. But do you, Stacy or Hansel, do you want to?
No, listen, I don't have anything to add on the family. I don't have children. I'm conscious of the fact that while being a woman leader, I'm also white. That has a set of advantages and has certainly, been a privilege that has made it more possible for me to navigate the world we're in, especially the fundraising world. I'm not, blind to that. And listening to Lisa and Maria tell their stories is just incredibly powerful. And I hope that, so here, I'm going to switch to some advice here. So for the teachers in the room, the young women, think hard about aspiring to be Maria, because the difficulties of the urban superintendency are such that, so first of all, it's where half of the low-income kids in our country are in the top 200, the largest 200 urban districts, and we need powerful leadership that not only understands how to lead and do the politics, but that understand instruction and understand what it means to be in a classroom and understand what it means to build a school community. And yes, it's incredibly hard. Yes, we've got to do some things to help make the job more doable, but I'm not confident that's going to happen. So I hope that some number of you who are having success with your kids in your classroom will start to think right now in your early, mid-20s, what will it take over the next decade to put you in a position to be able to take on the leadership challenge that Maria has now taken on 3 times in her career, and where, from my observational point of view, fewer and fewer women of color are actually taking superintendencies. When I, a decade ago, was working with a handful of superintendents of very large districts who were women of color, and they have all either retired or passed away. And I don't see the next generation of female leaders of color being prepared to take those jobs. And so, please be thinking about what it might take to have that on your opportunity set.
Thank you. Okay, one piece of advice.
So I think my advice would be to look for opportunities and take them even when there's risk involved. I remember talking to Kevin early on when he'd gotten to Tennessee, and we were talking about the chief of staff role, and I was saying, can I come in 6 months at the end of the school year? I'd really like to close out this role that I'm doing over the course of the school year. And he said, you can, and I'd love to have you. It won't be for this role, and it will be, frankly, probably a level or 2 down from what we're talking about. That's just the reality of we're at the early stages. I need someone now. This is what's open. And I took that jump, and it was hard. It was a hard transition, but I was so glad I did. And it was jumping into total chaos. We had no idea what we were doing, and we had very few people there to do the work. But it made all the difference, coming in at the front end like that, and coming to the role I'm in now at the state superintendent's office in DC, talking to people early on and saying, there's all kinds of stuff that is so broken, I can't even describe, basic things that should be in any office setting that just aren't there, and I don't know why, but I need you to come and help me build it from the beginning. So structures, goals, onboarding, there's none of that, but I need you to come and help me, and then a year from now, 2 years from now, we'll be able to create that for other people. And I think coming in early and building in those early stages, you learn so much from it. It's hard, it's chaotic, it's particularly hard to do with family, but the people who do it, I think you can learn a lot.
So take risks.
Yeah.
Take them. Yep. Everybody's scared.
Yeah, I think mine is similar to that, because as I think about my own trajectory, I literally have never, Maria, you said have a plan, you've been wanting to be number one. That was just not I had no plan. I had literally been chosen to do all the jobs that I have. Every promotion that I've gotten, it's because someone's like, you should do that, never because I was aspiring for it. What that teaches me is I never saw myself as anyone who would ever be an executive director, the chief operating officer, CEO, and you should see yourself that way. And you know why? Because now that I'm in this role, I'm I do this job way better than a bunch of men, and I'm so glad I'm in this job, and we should see ourselves that way. You bring so much. We bring something that's different and really important to the work, and we should men don't know what they're doing either. They just fake it better, and they just aren't scared to do it. And so we should fake it till we make it. You will make it because you're smart and you're enduring and you go for it, so go for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so my comment on planning, and I won't judge your perspective on how you got to where you are, but I will say mine is based in research. And it will take 77 more years for underrepresented women to be in the superintendency. So make no mistake, if you want to be in this job, you have got to do things like, and I'm just telling you why, it's public, bureaucratic education. So you can't get there if you haven't been a teacher, licensed somehow. I mean, like you got to have some kind of licensure in the state, teaching, administration, whatever. The other piece is that what's clear is like we don't go get the rest of our credentials. So like only 10% of women in education go and get their doctorates. You can get a superintendency, but I will tell you, when you're in the search itself and they are going to the sole finalist, they're looking at all of that. And to try to convince the public that you're going to choose and I'm looking at the audience, I'm just being honest, it's white females, overwhelmingly. They're not going to choose you, baby. They're not going to choose a white female with no doctorate and the wrong credentials over maybe a not as qualified black male with a doctorate or something. If you, and I'm just looking at the people in this room, want to be there, you have to take all those steps. I think until the systems change. And you know, you're in TFA, you know the fight you have ahead of you on the like privatizer stuff and you know, these people, I mean, it's the fight is unbelievable. So I think you have this on your resume. You've got to figure out how you work that so that you can get into the job. But I will tell you, I think that it's gonna be, we're underrepresented already, so you have to get some of the stuff that maybe in other professions you don't have to have, or maybe if you're a man you didn't have to have. But if you are going to be a white female in the superintendency in urban education, which is where I am, you're going to need to do some specific stuff. And I think part of the stuff that you do is very specific. I would encourage you to look at the research and then map out, because it takes at least 4 years, maybe 7, to get a doctorate. And if you want to do that, get on a plan to get your graduate degree done. I think that these things are really important to consider, and I'm not making them up. I'm just telling you the facts of what it looks like in our roles. But I think there are other things like be determined. You have to be so courageous so that you can fight to get there, because people will not believe. I mean, I'm black and I'm trying to help my people, black people in Atlanta, and I'm challenged all the time about my intentions. I try to imagine a white female in Atlanta as superintendent. If you're going to be in the urban space, like you said, where the bulk of minority children are, then you've got to think about how your courageousness and your commitment to children will overcome their biases about what maybe white people or white women think about black and brown children. I think that's real. I also think that I agree with the risks, but my dad has always taught me to be incredibly disciplined, except in the matters of the heart. And I think you have to show your love for children, and you need to love the people you work with. So getting a team around you is also critical to be in this job. You can't do it alone. So those people to your right and left are really important. So hiring smart. I told you I think you should manage your career and never do the dishes.
So this is that. I'm going to ask you to give this panel a hand in just a minute. I'm going to close with 2 pieces of advice of my own, quick ones. So one, I'll be personal. If you want to be in any of these positions, these top positions, and you want a family, then you do need to plan. You may plan it so you have kids while you're getting the PhD. It's hard, but it's a lot easier than it is when you're on somebody else's schedule. You may think, okay, I'm going to have kids, and then I'll go for the superintendency, but then what do I need to do? Turn off your phone. What do I need to do while I'm focusing more on kids that will get me those credentials so I am positioned? And in whatever it is, you need to find a partner, a woman or a man, who is secure enough to let you be a leader, right? Because you're going to be
I mean, in most cases, a bigger career than his. I know there are a few where you can be and compensate, don't assume you won't change, and compensate for it with a great supportive team. So this is a rock star panel. I mean, just fabulous to listen to. Give them a hand. Pleasure to meet you.